Good morning and a very warm welcome to the 8th meeting of the Education and Skills Committee in 2021. Can I ask everyone to please turn their mobile phones to silent so as not to disturb the meeting. This morning we've received apologies from Alec Neil, MSP. Our first item is to decide whether to take agenda item 4 and 5 in private. Do any members object? If you could do so by indicating in the chat, thank you. I see no indication that members object, so we'll move to agenda item 2. This is subordinate legislation, and it's to consider the following negative instrument. The Police Act 1997 and the Protection of Vulnerable Groups Scotland Act 2007, Fees, Coronavirus Amendment Regulations 2021, SSI 2021/71. Details of the instrument are in paper 1 of members' papers. Does anyone have any comments on these instruments? I'm not seeing any indication of members wishing to comment, so we will now move to agenda item 3, coronavirus and education. And it's an evidence session focusing on coronavirus and education with witnesses from ADIS, Education Scotland and the Scottish Qualifications Authority. Can I welcome to the meeting Carrie Lindsay, President of the Association of Directors of Education in Scotland, ADIS, Stephen Quinn, Chair of the Curriculum Assessment and Qualification Networks at ADIS, Gail Gorman, Chief Inspector of Education and Chief Executive Education Scotland, Janie McManus, Strategic Director of Scrutiny, Education Scotland, Fiona Robertson, Chief Executive of the Scottish Qualifications Authority, and Jean Blair, Director of Operations of the Scottish Qualifications Authority. And I will now invite Carrie Lindsay and Gail Gorman and Fiona Robertson to make very brief, short opening statements. And can I invite Carrie Lindsay to go first with that? Thank you.
Good morning. Just like to say that it's a privilege to be here and we're happy to answer any questions, but because of the number of things you want to get through today, we're not going to make a statement.
Okay, thank you, Carrie. I wasn't aware of that. Can we now move to Miss Lindsay, please?
That was me, Claire.
Oh, I'm dreadfully sorry. Can I invite Miss Gorman to make a statement?
Good morning, Convener. Good morning, committee members. Really pleased to be here and happy to discuss with you coronavirus and education. Similarly to ADAS, we don't have an opening statement given the range that you wish to cover this morning, but look forward to our discussions. Thank you.
Okay, so I would invite Miss Robertson, if she wishes to do so, to make an opening statement now.
Oh, good morning, Convener, and good morning, committee members. Similarly, very happy to be here to answer any questions the committee has in relation to qualifications in particular, and no opening statement today. Happy to answer any questions that you have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. That's very helpful. I'm sure we've got lots of questions to get through, so I'll invite Mr. Gray to be followed by Mr. Green. If other members wish to ask questions, could they please indicate by putting an R in the chat? Thank you. And to Mr. Gray first.
Oh, thank you very much, Convener. And I've got 2 lines of questioning, one really for the SQA and the other for Education Scotland. So with your forbearance, I'll perhaps ask Fiona Robertson first, a question around the SQA.
Can I just say, Mr. Gray, if other members do want to come in the first area, I'll maybe go to them and then come back to you. So, so just to let other members know that, if they could indicate by putting an R in the chat on this first topic area with SQA. Thank you.
Very happy. So, one of the areas which the committee has explored on a number of occasions with the SQA, but also with the Deputy First Minister, is around the appeals procedure last year when it came to certification. and in particular the problems of young people and their families who felt that the school assessment that had been made was not a fair one, and who then found that they couldn't appeal because appeals had to be submitted by the examination centre. Now, the last time the committee discussed this was with the Deputy First Minister back in November, and he said then that he would be willing to look at those who found themselves in that position as long as they had evidence. Now, for example, I have a constituent who has taken, whatever it is now, 6-7 months to get from his son's school the evidence, and he does now have evidence, that they did not properly take account of the circumstances that prevailed at the time of the assessment being made. And he has asked the SQA to appeal now, but has been told that last year's appeal procedure is closed. So he has nowhere to go with this. And I'd just like to ask why the SQA won't consider appeals from these young people, and there are others of them, who have now found evidence that the assessment that was made and submitted at the time was not a fair one.
Ms Robertson?
Thank you. So in relation to 2020 appeals, the decision to award grades on teacher estimates was made by the Scottish Government, so and the SQA was under a legal obligation to award grades in this manner. And what we put in place with the agreement of the Scottish Government was appeals on the basis of quite limited grounds, either administrative error by the school or the SQA, or indeed there was evidence of discrimination that could be evidence for the school, and that a school could appeal on that basis with the agreement of the candidate. And we were mandated by law through the ministerial direction to award grades on the basis of teacher estimates. So the appeals process, which ran until the 7th of September, with a little bit of flexibility thereafter, and my colleague Jean Blair can talk about that process in more detail, considered a number of appeals, and a significant proportion of those appeals were upheld. I think every year there comes a point where we have to close an appeals process, and as I say, we operated with a degree of flexibility following the 7th of September. But obviously we've had to move on to concentrate on 2021 appeals. Any further consideration by the Scottish Government, obviously we would take account, or we would consider any further issues in relation to appeals, either for last year or indeed for this year. But that's the process that we put in place. We considered those appeals as effectively and tenuously as possible, and schools and candidates were given ample opportunity to consider those appeals. I'm not aware of the specific case, Mr. Gray, that you mentioned. I'm happy to have a conversation either with you or with the school or candidate concerned about that, if that would be helpful.
Well, I think that would be helpful, and I'll certainly send the details of that particular case and perhaps some other cases that I know. I mean, my concern with that response is that these are young people who are not considered. I understand, I appreciate the effort that went into considering the appeals which were made from examination centres, but these are young people and families who wish to appeal directly to the SQA. So actually, the process meant that their appeals were not considered, they were refused because the SQA were not willing to accept appeals directly. So in the discussions of that the committee have had, there has been considerable concerns raised, for example, by Dr. Tracy Kirk, who's an academic who's looked into this, that such a process abrogated those young people's rights. And the Deputy First Minister has assured the committee on a number of occasions that that would be taken into consideration in the 2021 appeals procedure. So can I ask directly? When will we know what that procedure is? And will young people be able to appeal directly to the SQA where they believe that the school assessment that's been made is flawed?
Ms Robertson?
In relation to 2021 appeals this year, following the work that we've done on the alternative certification model with partners, we intend to issue a public consultation in relation to our appeals service, and we will be pursuing many of the issues that you've highlighted in your question, Mr Gray, including young people being able to appeal directly, and the grounds for any appeal which may apply. And importantly, we'll be engaging with young people and have engaged with young people about the emerging process for 2021. But crucially, that will be subject to a public consultation. There will be an opportunity for parents, for learners and for practitioners to provide views on the appeal service, and indeed for Tracy Kirk and any other parties to comment on the appeals process for 2021. So that's not confirmed, because it's important that we consult on this issue, given the interest both from young people and beyond.
Can you tell us the timetable for that?
I would anticipate that the consultation will issue very shortly, over the next week or two.
Okay,
it's currently going through a process. It's gone through a process with stakeholders, and it's also going through a process with our board and our qualifications committee at the moment. In fact, the qualifications committee is meeting today to discuss that, amongst other things.
Okay, convener, I would move to Education Scotland, but I don't know if you want to bring anyone else in.
I think if you want to move to Education Scotland, I'll bring members in individually after that, Mr Gray. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So my other question is around measures taken to try and mitigate the effects of the loss of learning over the time of the pandemic, and in particular for those young people who in any case face greater barriers than most to achievement within our schools. In my own constituency in East Lothian, a tutoring scheme has been set up which is making available to around 300 young people identified by their schools a programme of individual one-to-one tutoring. So these young people will be allocated a tutor who will work with them over a period of time, virtually, of course, at the moment anyway, in order to try and help them catch up, I suppose, would be the term. Now, I've raised this on a couple of occasions with both the First Minister and the Deputy First Minister, and I was told that this facility was available to all young people in all parts of Scotland through the eSchool National Remote Learning Facility. And I'd just like Gail Gorman to give us some more details of that tutoring initiative, which we've been told is available.
Ms Gorman?
Thank you, Convener. Thanks, Mr Gray. It's a very important point you raise in terms of supporting our young people during the pandemic, but importantly beyond it. So I know that there are various programmes like the one you described that local authorities are using some of the money from the Scottish Government, or schools are using money they were given by Scottish Government to put in a variety of support. In terms of the ESCOL offer, we have been running since actually the autumn term in partnership with ESCOL study support sessions. So we have 3 each evening in a range of different subjects. And we have had huge uptake of that from young people. So these are small groups who are brought together, for instance, higher history, philosophy, languages, whatever subject. They're brought together with 2 teachers online. So one running the teaching session, one working with the young people in their responses on the chat function and answering questions and queries. And these groups have grown exponentially during the months of the closure, and actually we continued them with schools were reopened physically as buildings as well. We have a widening range of subjects available, extensive from National 4 through to Advanced Higher, and with the young people have fed back how much they are learning from that, how they've created network learning communities for students together, and that is supporting their learning in school. We are adding and continually add to that offer all the time. We're bringing more and more subjects on board, but the feedback from the students, and I've actually attended a couple of these sessions myself to test and to listen in and to hear the engagement, has been hugely positive. That's available not only through the ESCOL platform, but we've also made it so it's not behind the Glow Fireball. So children and young people themselves sign up for those sessions. They can do it through the school, but they don't have to. So it's open access, and currently there's well over 4,500 young people engaged in those sessions, but many of them are engaged in more than one subject, as you can imagine. So that's the unique individual users, but many of them are taking up 3 or 4 subjects. Some very good work there, and growing use of that, I think, as we continue and come out of the closures particularly, actually that this has been a good network for learners. They're learning and challenging each other across Scotland, and that actually they're then taking that learning into the classroom, their teachers are building on it. So a very positive feedback from parents, children and teachers around the use of that study support sessions.
So can I just ask you, these sessions, how long your expectation is that that support will continue, and is it something that you see going on beyond the pandemic in terms of trying to mitigate the effects of the year we've had, or be more than a year by the time we're talking about?
Indeed, yes. We certainly see the role of these study support sessions continuing, particularly if we think about access to wider curriculum, access to subject choice, and all of the issues, you know, the committee has discussed on several occasions, I know, in the past. But one of the silver linings from this terrible tragedy is the advancement of the use of IT and remote learning. Teachers have done an amazing job in developing different pedagogies. My team have supported that both in the technology, but also in discussions about different pedagogies for a different type of learning. And actually going forward, we mustn't go back to traditional methods. We must remain in a proactive and recursive learning mode, because the feedback from our young people on remote learning is that they really value particularly recorded lessons, where they can revisit that at a time that suits them. They can go over concepts of learning, and also they can work with others on things that they find challenging. So we certainly see the eSchool offer, the national e-learning offer, growing and developing, hopefully as the pandemic finishes, but also as we look at a different approach to education, as many countries will globally. But we've got the opportunity here with the Network Glow to be able to support that. So I see this, we don't have any plans to stop that broadcast, stop those events, and in fact we're looking at further innovation.
Okay, thanks. Thank you, Convener.
Just before we move on, I know that Ms Robertson had mentioned that Ms Blair might want to come in on your initial questioning. I'm just seeking an indication from Ms Blair if she does want to add anything to what's been said.
I would be happy to describe the process if that would be helpful, Convener.
Yes, I think it would be, thank you.
Okay, so as we know, the process was one that centres had to provide appeals or submit appeals on behalf of their candidates. I should be very clear that actually candidates themselves had to give permission for those appeals before they were submitted, and we clearly looked for that as part of our process. So the first thing we did was do a quick administrative check that all of that was in place and the centre had the support of the candidate. It then moved into an initial panel of experienced managers who are used to handling appeals, both either centre or candidate malpractice appeals, and they then considered or made a recommendation to a second panel, which consisted of myself and a head of service, again very experienced in handling appeals, and we would then, if we had any doubt about the nature of that appeal or needed more information, before we made any judgments, we reached out to centres and asked for information. So we'd be clarifying clarifying information and ensuring that we had the full facts before we arrived at a judgment. When we arrived at that outcome, we advised the centre in writing, and if the centre remained satisfied for that, they could phone and have a conversation with the head of service, and often that could actually lead to a change of outcome. If they could provide us with more information in support of their appeal, there was a chance that that would lead to a positive outcome. If, on the other hand, it did not lead to a positive outcome, it could then go into an escalated appeals process, and we only received 4 cases in which centres believed there had been a procedural irregularity on the part of SQA, and in all cases no such irregularity was found to have occurred. So it was quite a robust process that we put in place, and at each stage we considered the evidence carefully. If that evidence was not complete, we reached out to the centre for more information. And of the majority of the 664 appeals, 565 of those appeals were actually centre admin error. So we really were, trying our best to give centres and candidates, learners, the benefit of the doubt through the appeals process. We did our best to do what we could through that process and the limited grounds in which it was operating.
Thank you very much, Ms Blair. Mr Gray, are you content that we still move on? Do you want to come back in?
Yes, I think it's fair to say I appreciate that information. I don't think the committee has heard evidence that there was a problem with the robustness of the appeals process for those who were able to appeal. The issue is those who were excluded from the appeals process. But thanks very much.
Thank you. Can we move to Mr Green to be followed by Ms Wishart, please? And if members could ask all their questions on all the areas, I think it'd be easier, given the size of the committee, just to go to each individual member in turn. So, Mr Green.
Okay, I have two separate, distinct areas of questioning. The SQA questions are very separate, so I'll maybe keep them till the end. My questions, general questions around education, are probably directed to Education Scotland. The first, I've got 4 areas and I'll lump them into 2, therefore to make it easier. The first is around remote learning and recovery and catch-up. I guess my main question is, why did it take so long to get digital devices out to those who were lacking them during the pandemic? And why did some pupils have such a varied experience of what remote learning looked and felt like? For example, why did some pupils have a large volume? Sorry, convener, I think your mic's still on. Why did?
Sorry, I dropped a piece of paper. Sorry, my apologies.
Rustling paper. So I'll start that question again. Why did some pupils have a very good experience of remote learning in terms of live face-to-face teaching, for example, and others had very little or even none? And the other question was around digital devices. So that's my first question.
I'll maybe go to I don't know if anyone wants to come in first. I'm not seeing any indication.
Convener,
I'll go to Ms Gorman first. Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you. Convener, I was just going to suggest that might be better starting off with our EDAS colleagues, talking about, because the rollout of digital devices was really the Scottish Government's remit, and Education Scotland were not involved in the rollout of equipment or connectivity. But I'm sure that my EDAS colleagues would be able to talk about the implications and the implementation of that at local authority level.
Absolutely, thank you for that. So I'm looking to see if does Miss Lindsay or Mr Quinn want to come in?
I'm happy to come in. Thank you, convener.
Yes, thanks. Thank you.
Yeah, we did receive a number of devices across local authorities where we were able to distribute those in various tranches. There was a bit of a delay because of the supply, but that was necessary. It happened across Scotland. So we did receive in batches across the whole of Scotland. We also received connectivity, because it's not just about the device. And I think that the remote learning overviews that have been done, that Jeannie McManus may want to comment on, but certainly the remote learning overviews would suggest that there was much better access after we were able to distribute the devices and the connectivity. It would also be fair to say that the remote learning is not all about online learning. So the remote learning is about a whole range of approaches, because we don't want our children and young people to be sat in front of screens constantly. So we wanted to make sure that there were different opportunities that our young people had. So certainly the devices helped us to be able to make that happen. We're still working through in local authorities, and we're able to purchase more devices, and I know that there are a range of approaches across our local authorities to make sure that we provide an equity of access to resource in terms of device, but as I say, also to make sure that it's not all just based on devices. But Janie might want to come in on the overview and what that found.
Yeah, Ms McManus, thanks.
Yes, I'm happy to come in for that. Yeah, I think we've found over the piece, and actually the system has got to be commended for what it's done. This has been a huge challenge for everyone involved in education, and what we've certainly found through our team of inspectors engaging with local authorities and schools and head teachers is that the experience of remote learning has improved since the first lockdown, but also has improved over the course of this term as well. I think if we reflect on pre-COVID, one of the key areas that we've highlighted is that the levels of variability in high quality learning and teaching existed before COVID. So it's natural that there is going to be variation within schools, across schools and across local authorities during the pandemic, as everyone's grappled really quickly with delivering all of their learning and teaching online. But I think what we've certainly seen a commitment to the levels of professional learning, both to help teachers and help schools and help staff actually to grapple with delivering learning, whether it be remotely or providing learning in different ways as well. And we've seen over the course of the piece that the range of different activities that schools have provided for children and young people, whether it's pre-recorded learning, live learning, independent learning, open-ended tasks, has increased in terms of the range, but also in terms of how schools and local authorities have been gathering feedback from both learners and parents to adapt and amend their approaches as they go on as well. And we have seen positive work, but there are challenges, and for everyone, there's challenges around practical subjects, there's challenges around providing sometimes very, very specific support as well. But the commitment in the system is definitely there to work through those challenges and to arrive at solutions.
Thank you. I think Mr Quinn wants to come in just before we come back to you, Mr Green, if we bring in Mr Quinn.
Sure. Thank you, Convener. It's just picking up on that point at the end that Janie made, and that is that this is an iterative process. We have to remember schools are all about learning. And that is not just the children and the young people who are in the schools, that is the whole school community, including all of our staff, both within the school and in central positions. And I think schools have been, on the piece across the country, really good at engaging with their school communities through pupil focus groups, surveys, their parent councils, parent surveys and so on, that they have tried to improve what they have delivered as time has gone on. And also across the country within central local authority teams, and how they have reached out to communicate with parents and indeed children and young people to look at all the emerging themes. Where are the challenges and how can we continually improve the offer to our children and our young people? So this process, if we look at what we are delivering across the country today, is of course much better than it was a month ago, 2 months ago, 3 months ago, and so on. And I would expect it to continually get better. However, I'm hoping it doesn't need to get continually better, and that we get, of course, all of our children, our young people, back into school. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr Green?
Yes, so absolutely, Mr Quinn, I think that's the end goal we all share on the committee, and within government, I'm sure, shares that ambition. But the reality is, of course, that things are getting better, but it has taken a while to get to where we are. The reality is that many young people, despite the endeavours and great efforts of schools and teachers, many did fall through the cracks. And it seems to me, given that Education Scotland said it wasn't their job or responsibility to ensure that children were online or connected, that seems slightly worrying to me, Ms Gorman, because presumably the role of Education Scotland would be, as the government agency in charge of education, to ensure that children are connected and accessing online learning, and indeed in your role as Inspectorate of Education would be ensuring that that is taking place, even if it's not your responsibility and the responsibility of others. So maybe you can comment on that as part of my next question, which is around the role of recovery and catch-up. Can I ask what national plans are in place for national catch-up programmes, whether that's tutoring, mentoring, catch-up schemes? Is there a coordinated national approach to this? Or, again, is this something that's been left to the devices of local authorities or indeed local schools?
Okay, I see Ms Gorman's indicating she wants to come in. If other panel members could put an R in the chat if they want to come in, that would be helpful too. Ms Gorman.
Thank you, Convener. If I just pick up on Mr Green's first point, I think we're really clear about the roles and responsibilities of Education Scotland, and actually funding devices and device rollout does not sit with Education Scotland. That sits with the Learning Directorate within the Scottish Government, and then through the delivery in partnership with local authorities. That's very clear in our framework and governance documents. However, of course, we are fully committed to supporting that and have been working as ever in partnership with the whole system across the Scottish education sector to support and drive that. And the work of the Inspectorate has been to absolutely talk to everyone across the system to identify the barriers, which at the beginning and some of our earlier reports were absolutely around connectivity, not just through the provision of devices, but also the challenges in rural communities about a lack of connectivity, and also identify the best practice where schools and local authorities had found ways around that, workarounds, physical resources, drop-offs, and all the wonderful work that's going on across Scotland. And our role is to capture that and to feed that into SERG for them to see what the challenges are, where the successes are, and to feed that information into the system through ministers, into the Scottish Government, to then support, as you rightly say, that drive to ensure greater connectivity for all our learners, which is something we want all our young people to have, not only now, but actually going forward as a system to support that. In terms of a recovery plan, we've been working in various work streams across the SERG work streams, because no one in the Scottish education family is working independently and individually. What we're very keen to do is make sure we have a connected and joined up set of responses to COVID, and the SERG is driving that. Education Scotland has taken the lead in a number of the workstream groups around particularly professional learning for teachers to support not only pedagogy and delivery, but the health and wellbeing and the longevity of health and wellbeing for teaching staff, support staff and head teachers who are shouldering this burden. We have been developing and continue to develop a whole range of recovery materials, including things for children and young people, things like the Resilience Alphabet, which was hugely used and continues to be used. We have YouTube support channels for children and young people, and we have subject-specific guidance and support. We will continue to work with SERG as a system, with our partners in ADAS, with SQA, with others, with local authority and COSLA, to make sure that there is a robust support to help children, young people and our schools recover from this period of physical closure. But I think we also have to maybe draw in some of the global research, and Michael Fullan's research recently, last month in fact, about the right drivers for whole system success, is that we've got to kind of avoid, his quote is, recommends avoiding the loss of learning mindset, because that would take us back to traditional learning. So I think the ask, and you're right, is there to, let's think differently about this. Let's build on the positives, build on the learning that's taken place, and actually create a coordinated plan that comes from all partners and supports our young people to recover in the fullest sense, and particularly in developing their health and wellbeing and socialisation skills. So there is work ongoing, and that is coordinated through the SERG. It doesn't sit with any one organisation.
Thanks for that. Convener, I'm trying to rush through my questions. Not everyone needs to respond to every question, if that's all right, because they are quite different themes and topics. What I perhaps didn't hear, Ms Gorman, and thank you for that answer. There's lots of great work going on, and we should be thankful to those who are doing that work. It is, however, a central responsibility. I didn't really get a feel from your answer that there is someone in charge of this. There's a coordinated national approach. It did sound like there were lots of good things happening in individual silos, but not that there was a coordinated approach or indeed a centralised responsibility for the delivery of it. And I'm hoping perhaps you can maybe respond to the committee in writing that later on how that is structured in the interest of time. But I had a technical question now about getting young people back into school if we can, and it's open to anyone in the panel. And it's really around the announcement that was made yesterday by the First Minister over testing capability to ensure that we get young people back into schools. Can I ask if anyone on the panel knows how many test kits will be available, how many staff or pupils have been identified as potential candidates for receiving these tests, if, as it is planned, they will require or will be offered 2 lateral flow tests per week, how many schools will they be offered to, and how many tests will be made available in the time required to allow young people to go back to school in the next fortnight?
Okay, thank you, Mr Greenup. I think both Ms Gorman and Ms Lindsay want to commence. I'll go to Ms Gorman first. Thanks.
Apologies, Convener, that was my previous R.
Oh, I'm sorry, no, I'll bring in Miss Lindsay then. And my apologies too. It's had to keep up with the chat.
Thank you, Convener. Certainly our experience so far is that we have sufficient numbers of testing kits in all of our schools. The only place where it's a little bit later in happening was with our private providers, and we're catching up with that now, just because it was a much more complex distribution to go to all of our providers in the PVI sector. So we are managing to have enough quantity of supplies to be able to do what is required, which is for all staff to be tested who wish to. It's not mandatory, and for all young people. We did feel that at the beginning it might be that young people were not quite but I'm certainly in my own to have the test from others that our young people want to be responsible, and they are really keen to make sure that they are taking part in the testing process. So at the current time there are sufficient quantities. We've no reason to believe that that will change going forward, because all of our schools are currently back, although the numbers will increase obviously with the return to school. So we'll be able to monitor that as we go, but at the current time we have sufficient quantities.
Thank you. I think that covers.
Lose you for a few moments there, Miss Lindsay. Are you content? You heard everything you needed, Jamie?
Yeah, I think you're breaking up there a little bit, Miss Lindsay, but I think I get the gist of that. Whilst I didn't hear any numerical figures, and again, feel free to write to the committee if you have that data. I'd be quite interested to know exactly how many schools will be receiving tests, how many staff been identified as potentially asking for them, and again that it's just a volume gain, so we're planning ahead to ensure that the cover is there. But it sounds like you're confident that the tests are available to anyone and everyone who asks for one and is offered one, which is good. But if you could keep us posted on that, that'd be great. Convener, I have questions for the SQA. Shall I do that now, or shall I let other members come in?
If we let other members come in, and I'll come back to you at the end for those further questions, if that's okay. So move to Ms Wishart to be followed by Mr Mundell.
Thanks, Convener, and good morning, panel. My first question is for Education Scotland. We knew that some form of blended learning was always a possibility, but yesterday the First Minister said that Education Scotland will only produce guidance 4 working days before it's supposed to be implemented. Why is it not ready now?
Looking to Ms Gorman. We're not hearing you, but thank you.
You hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. I sometimes have signal issues myself. Thank you for that question. The guidance is planned to go out today to support this information. Obviously, this decision was only made by Cabinet yesterday and then announced by the First Minister. So, and the nuances around it, and how many children will be coming back, which year groups, that practical guidance is being updated in consultation, as I said, with SERG members and with actually some members of the profession directly to test out how it would land and how it would work. And that information will be in the system later on today, which is actually less than 48 hours from the announcement. So we think we've acted keenly and swiftly, and doing that, consulting all of our professional associations, all the members of SERG, to make sure that that's agreed advice and guidance. We've turned around pretty quickly and we'll be out tomorrow, but we can't write the guidance if the decision, particularly the clinical decisions that drive it, had led to a different phased return or different groupings. So we're proactively on top of that, have some things prepared and have it edited to then enable that guidance to go out later today once SERG members have signed it off.
Okay, thank you for that. You mentioned in a previous answer about the health and well-being of staff, and teachers now have to plan learning for a remote class, an in-person class, and for additional evidence gathering for assessment. So do you accept that this is a significant workload increase?
I think that there are challenges around how schools will operate this, which is why we've been really careful in the guidance that will be released in ensuring that the local empowerment of schools and teachers and departments is at the heart of it, because every single school, as we all know, is different. They have a different physical building, they have a different staffing ratio, and in secondary in particular, they have different courses that they're following. So, the headline guidance is around how to work that, what some of the parameters are, particularly around health and safety. But I think that there are challenges around that. But the work we've been doing collectively as part of the National e-learning offer will support that. One of the things that we launched last week, and there's a big push throughout March, because we were aware this may, some of the return may happen, is a particular focus on the remote learning for S1 to S3, because some of those young people may not be in school that frequently, and I might ask colleagues may want to comment on this, but we've worked proactively with the BBC so that their programming is going to turn as the primary children go back. It's going to focus on an offer for S1 to S3. ESCO live lessons and recorded lessons have started, in fact, on Monday to focus much more predominantly on S1 to S3. And we have a growing bank of recorded resources which will focus on S1 to S3, as well to support the teachers' workload. As well as that, we'll be putting out across national challenges, some of which linked to the up-and-coming COP, IDL national challenge activities and questions, which teachers can direct young people to, so that they are working on that and there isn't actually a big ask of the teachers themselves to create that activity. As well as some other challenges and activities around creativity, music, dance, sport, etc., as well as a push around outdoor learning activities and engagement. So we want to help address that. We want to help support the system in trying to coordinate, while we must maintain as well a focus on our national qualification young people and ensure we focus on their pathway. So there's a lot of work going on and a lot of work which has gone out in the last week or so, which will continue to go out, try and address that. But I do recognise the challenges of this model, but perhaps as Lindsay would like to comment a bit more about that locally.
Miss Lindsay, sorry.
Thanks, Convener. I'm happy to comment that obviously it's a real challenge, and that not having the guidance currently is difficult for our secondary schools in particular. It's easier for the primary schools because they're all coming back, and we're really pleased that they're all coming back. We did give our professional opinion as part of the discussions, as Gail said, and that we now have to enact what the government have asked us to do in terms of the guidance that's there. So we are working really hard at local authority level, as we always do, to support our young people so that they get the best possible experience that it does offer for S4 to 6 to ensure that they are going to meet their national qualification requirements, whilst we still continue to make sure that S1 to 3 have an effective experience in learning, and that for some of that we're looking to see that all of the young people have an opportunity at some point before the Easter holidays to come back and see what it's like to be back in school. They're keen to be back, they're keen to see their friends, we're keen to welcome them back, but it can't go without a lot of organisation in order for that to happen. And it will be different across the country because different circumstances and different school settings, different geographical settings, and will mean that different numbers of children will be able to come in at one time. So there is undoubtedly a lot of work required with authorities. What's important for us now that we've been given the go-ahead really that what's going to happen is we want to make it work for our children and young people and to make sure that our schools are safe places for them and for our staff to be.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is that
my next? No, I have one more question about the impact on learning.
Beatrice, yeah.
I can go ahead, thanks. The impact on learning, we know that learning's obviously been impacted, and some young people and their parents are questioning the point of going to university because they feel they've had the lack of exam experience due to 2 years of cancellations and also studying courses with reduced content, and they don't feel they're going to be in a position to cope with university. So in order to understand, that every young person is in the same position, but with the cessation of other school activities and restrictions, there seems to be a symptom of some negativity and lack of motivation in some young people. So how is that going to be counteracted for those that are staying on for another year at school? I wonder if Carrie Lindsay could respond to that.
Ms. Lindsay?
Thanks, Claire. I'll give a brief response and then I'm going to pass to Stephen, who's got obviously the remit within ADES for qualifications. But I think you're right. We really want to make sure that our young people are not disadvantaged, and that's why it's been really good that we've been able to use teacher judgment and to support our young people into their post-school destinations. I think that we have a challenge ahead of us in terms of the employability agenda, because we know that there are not going to be as many jobs available for our children and young people. So we do need to think about higher education, further education, and how we ensure that we make them in a position that they're able to pass to Stephen, who's more knowledgeable on the qualification side.
Mr. Quinn?
Thank you. Thank you, Convener. First of all, it's obviously the young people that are in front of us just now and will be leaving school to go off onto whether that be jobs, college, further training, university. I know in a lot of our schools right across the country is they're working hard with these young people, not just on their qualifications and not just to ensure that the learning and teaching leads through to appropriate assessment and then grades and their qualifications that their work and their effort merits, but also on how we support them onto that next part of their learning journey. And that can be young people at all different levels. So I know that schools are working with these young people in terms of interviews, central teams, support staff to help that part and that journey onto whether that be college, university or the workplace. So that work is taking place. It would normally be, of course, in school, but they are making the best they can of that. In terms of the young people that are coming next and will be staying in our schools, the academic part and their qualifications are undoubtedly of critical importance. Nobody disputes that. But what we also want to do is ensure we get our young people back to enjoying the wider aspects of school life. And indeed, for many young people that come towards the end of their school life, it is all the other things they do that set them up for life beyond school. And that is going to be so critical that we get our young people back into school, and for the year ahead and the years ahead, that they get back to having the opportunities that their peers have always had, whether that be in school excursions, trips, planning proms, the committees, the leadership activities they have, all of these things. How do we ensure that we absolutely make the most of these opportunities? And schools are already doing this through their pupil equity funding and their planning for the future, through some of the recovery money that's gone into schools, of how we plan for our children going forward, and not just being reactive to what's happening now. Of course, that's important, but it's also about being proactive to what comes next, and ensuring that the kids who are coming through the school at the moment get these opportunities. And the loss that they've had so far, that we don't see that. We do not see that as not being retrievable, and that we do everything to catch up and ensure that they are ready for the opportunities in the future.
Thanks, Mr. Quinn. That it is about learning, but it's also about that whole school experience, and for many senior pupils who have lost that end of school ritual, if you like, and all that goes with it. I do have another question, Convener, but I'm conscious of time.
Well, if you're happy, I'll come back to you at the end, if that's okay. Yeah. And I'll move on. And I'll bring in Mr. Mundell and then Mr. Johnson.
Hi, thank you, Convener. My question's for Gail Gorman, and I was interested to know if she or anyone else at Education Scotland had seen the interim findings of the OECD review, and whether or not she'd been asked to comment on them.
Ms. Gorman?
ADAS, SQA and Education Scotland as key stakeholders have been involved in the planning around the OECD review since back in 2020, and have been, as I think is publicly known, shown a very early draft discussion document for factual accuracy and any additional evidence that was to be presented, before that's then openly discussed at the stakeholder forums that many of us are involved in March, in actually quite short regard to that. So we've seen some initial discussions and thoughts as part of that report, as is normal with the process with the OECD. And in fact, before the OECD, SQA ourselves and ADAS submitted significant evidence around the activity from inspection, from previous reports and from other documents that we have, as we do and have done in similar reports in the past.
Thank you. The reason I ask is just, obviously we all want the Scottish education system to be fighting fit as we come back from coronavirus. I just wondered whether there were any early lessons or anything that you'd start working on as a result of what's been sort of shared with you already, whether you kind of move on already to sort of start planning. 'Cause, this is probably the best opportunity for a reset that we've had in a long time.
I'm very conscious we don't want to preempt the report, and it is an interim version that Ms. Gorman has seen, but I'll let her answer if she wishes to do so.
Convener, with due respect, I don't think that that's fair. Obviously, if an education body that's responsible for delivering education in Scotland became aware of concerns from the OECD, it would seem logical that they would start, at least considering those early findings at the first available opportunity. I'm not asking to share the details. I'm just asking if that work has started.
Okay, Ms. Gorman.
Thanks, Convener. It was very early days, and in fact, the stakeholder discussion needs to take place, which is happening in the next couple of weeks, before any work like that could begin. It's very much a collective discussion. The methodology the OECD use now is very much about system learning, which we absolutely welcome. And as Mundell is right in terms of, absolutely, this is a very good time globally and nationally to reset and look at our wishes and aspirations for Scottish education going forward. We look forward to that, but we'll do that with the OECD's timeline and the plan dissemination and actions that they control and take forward.
Thank you, Convener. I'm happy to leave it there.
Okay, thank you. Can we bring in Mr Johnson to be followed by Mr Greer?
Thank you very much, Convener. The committee has rightly focused a lot on the coming months and how we recover as we progress through the spring. But I think it's also important that we look to the coming academic year, where while we will need to recover from the impacts of the last 12 months. But I think what's also increasingly clear is that once we have vaccinated the population, COVID is not going to go away. This is a situation we are going to have to live with. So can I ask two questions following from that? First of all, what work is being done to make adjustments for the new school year to ensure that social distancing, and are there any particular impacts in subject areas, particularly subjects like music and PE, where social distancing requirements are problematic? And secondly, in my constituency, and I've written to Education Scotland about this, capital projects and their delays have meant that hybrid learning, virtual learning, is going to continue into the new school year. I'd be interested in both ADES and Education Scotland's view on the appropriateness of that, because surely we should be attempting to maximise face-to-face learning, not turning virtual learning into the new normal. So I'd be interested in a response to both of those points.
Okay, I'll bring in Ms Lindsay to be followed by Ms Gorman. Thanks.
Thank you, Convener. And I think you're right. We're looking at how we can make sure that we build on the expertise that we've unearthed across our all of our teaching professions. So we now have lots of people who are much more skilled in terms of being able to deliver through a remote platform, and also in doing recorded lessons. So we are already starting to look at how we can build that into what happens going forward. We have a national board that I sit on as the president of ADES, but it's also Education Scotland and the Scottish Government sit on that board, and we're looking at our national e-learning offer, and part of that work is to start to think about what do we do beyond the pandemic. So it's about thinking what can we learn from this that we take forward for the e-learning offer. So that work is underway. I'm not recognising the delay in the capital projects, so certainly within local authorities there are still capital projects ongoing. There will be slight delays, but not significant delays that mean that the work that is underway will perhaps not be able to be realising our new buildings going forward. And the point about the physical distancing, I think it's really clear that we're hoping, obviously I'm not privy to the scientific clinical advice, but we're certainly really clear that we would want all of our children to be back in school as quickly as possible when it's safe to do so for our staff and our children and young people, and we would hope that that's without the of distancing. So to be thinking about the new academic term, we do need to think about being flexible, and I think that's where we've recognised that when we do have to have groups of children that have to self-isolate, or sometimes whole schools that are self-isolating, that's again where the remote learning comes in. So certainly there are contingency plans in place at local authority level, and we are looking, as I say, about how we build on some of that learning going forward on things like that are going forward. Thank you.
Sorry, can I just briefly clarify on a point that you just made there, Ms Lindsay? I mean, I agree with you that we must learn lessons where there are things that are to be found to have been of value from virtual learning, but there is a fine line between that and essentially introducing virtual learning as the new normal. So, for example, I think your example of pre-recorded lessons, that's useful in addition to face-to-face learning. Can you just clarify that that's what you're talking about? This is in addition to face-to-face learning rather than a substitute, and therefore kind of some of the patterns we've seen this year being kind of that the normal expectation for delivering learning in our schools.
Absolutely. That's why I said that we're keen to get back to face-to-face learning for all of our children and young people. We know that our children and young people, for all of the harms that are around just now, not just about the pandemic, but about socially not being able to be together, that we want them to be in a school environment. However, there are things that we've learned from this experience. So there are some young people who find it much easier to contribute online than they do perhaps in a classroom setting, for example. So there are those sorts of things that we need to think about, how we support individual learners, not by having it move all virtually online, but how we use some of those approaches to enhance the learning and personalisation and choice within our schools.
Thank you.
Ms Gorman, did you want to come in?
I would just echo what Carrie has said. There's a quote from the OECD that I've used an awful lot in the last months, but technology can amplify the work of great teachers, but it will not replace them. And absolutely, that's the focus of our aspiration. I'm certainly very aspirational and keen that the social distancing requirement, obviously in the hands of clinicians, will not be there, because it does cause huge issues with bringing back our children and being able to support them through these challenging times. We have done some significant work looking at, as Carrie said, looking at the future and taking the best parts of remote learning and thinking how those can be adapted for an in-school learning experience, where, I've always said that schools are not the physical buildings, they're porous, and the pandemic has shown us just how porous that is and their central role in the community. So if we take that porous approach to the walls are not the barrier, actually the type of work and the building of a new narrative, a new pedagogy that takes the best for all, but absolutely has that expertise of the teacher, the face-to-face relationship, and the building of highly effective pedagogies at the heart. And I think that remote learning can be effective given the right conditions, but actually it does not replace the physical interaction between a skilled teacher and their learners. So very much working with partners to develop that. We've got an awful lot of really good resources now, really good exemplars, which can be used as additionality to that in-school experience, but very much with the committee on absolutely want our young people back to school without these restrictions when it's safe to do so.
Okay, Mr Johnson.
Yeah, well, I thank both panels for that response. I think I'll move on to my next question, which is very much around the SQA certification and estimates. I think since we last spoke to you, Ms Robertson, there has been additional information, and I've just got some questions about evidence gathering and how the different approaches for different subject areas may relate, and indeed kind of the nature of those. So just this morning I was just looking at the detailed guidance for evidence gathering for both chemistry. If you look at those, they are in a sense quite different. So chemistry, very much the emphasis on class tests, the use of past papers and specimen papers, and setting those in order to gather evidence. Whereas if you look at English, and perhaps unsurprisingly, there's a broader range. The emphasis there is that yes, those things can be used, but also other examples in coursework. So there's a different emphasis. So there are two questions that arise from that for me. First of all, is that to what degree are the certification going to be comparable between subjects, given that they're actually going to be assessed in qualitatively different ways? And then secondly, where class tests are being used, I was just wondering if you could provide more detail about how the consistency of application of those is going to be arrived at. And in particular, I mean, and this is hearsay, I recognise, I mean, there is some concern that essentially everyone's going to be asked to sit last year's paper that was prepared but wasn't actually set, but it'll be on different days of answers.
Sorry, Mr. Johnson, we're losing your connection.
They're all.
I think.
As it's you say, but
yeah. We missed a lot of that contribution, Daniel. I think you were making a comparison between chemistry and English. Could you maybe repeat your question, your final sort of point?
I'll try to succinctly as well. Given that different subjects have different approaches to evidence gathering, how are they comparable? Secondly, how will class tests, when those are being used, be set consistently and ensuring that essentially candidates in different settings can't just exchange what questions they were set.
Okay, we'll go to the Scottish Miss Robertson first. But if other panel members do wish to comment, if they could indicate in the chat, that would be helpful.
Thank you. Yeah, so the two parts of Mr. Johnson's question. The first part was around the differences in evidence gathering and guidance across different subjects. I think in broad terms, there are differences in the assessment approach that we take across different subjects every year, based on the skills and knowledge that we expect, and of course differences in the subjects themselves. So, for example, there's a lot of coursework components in English, so that the approach there would be different. So, for example, to chemistry, where different skills and knowledge is expected. So in part, the guidance for across each subject reflects the broader assessment approach that is part of any normal year. Now, as Mr. Johnson will be aware, we undertook I talked about this last time. We undertook a consultation around modifications to assessment this year, and in anticipation of this disruption this year. So some courses had elements, particularly practical subjects, had elements removed. For example, coursework in relation to some practical subjects, because we felt that would be too difficult in the context of the arrangements for this year. So there are always differences across subjects in terms of the skills and the knowledge that is expected, and therefore the assessment approach which is appropriate. So I suppose I would just want to highlight that broad difference is reasonable and expected. And the guidance that we produced around evidence gathering for every subject and every course was obviously heavily involved subject experts, both within SQA but also engaging with our subject teams, which involves teachers and practitioners in schools and colleges, and some of our appointees that are important in the work that we do every year. In terms of the assessment approach itself, which I think is the second part of the question, we provided assessment resources, again, across each subject and course, and we thought that would be helpful to schools, and those have obviously been provided on a secure website with guidance around security, as you would expect, to seek to mitigate some of the risks that Mr. Johnson highlights. But I think importantly, we've given schools and colleges some flexibility in the assessment approach that they take, with the oversight of the guidance around evidence gathering, where the focus is very much on quality, not quantity of that evidence. So we have provided some flexibility. So I would not anticipate that across Scotland every young person will be taking exactly the same test paper or exam paper, or have the exam paper being split into sections. There'll be a variety of approaches reflecting the circumstances and the curriculum approach that's taken by individual schools, and the progress that was made pre-Christmas and the work that's been done post-Christmas. I hope that answers your question, but I think differences. I think we're confident about the flexibility that the approach that we've highlighted in the guidance that we've provided, alongside well-established differences in the assessment approach across subjects.
Mr. Quinn, do you want to come in, please?
Thank you, Convener. I won't labour any further point in terms of the difference across subjects. I think Fiona has answered that, and that's just what's normal in any normal year and how you assess different subject areas. I think what's really important in the first part is this needs everyone across the systems to be working together and in partnership for the benefit to ensure that our young people get the best possible outcomes. So if we maybe take Mr. Johnson through some of that. The first part is our teachers have been working on the understanding standards and engaging with that so that they recognise what the national standard is when they're looking at the assessment tools that they will put together. The validation of those assessment tools are really important. That's why at local authority and at RIC level, there is work going on to validate the assessment tools. Yes, schools can use, and they should obviously have careful consideration to using an SQA paper in its entirety. But I think they also, and the advice they have been giving across the networks, is that they look at assessment pieces that don't necessarily just mirror previous paper, because they must look at their own young people in their own cohort, and whilst understanding the standards and whilst making sure they're meeting national standards, that they are sampling appropriate course content that gives their young people the best possible opportunity whilst meeting the national standard. They of course will use SQ assessment materials to support this, and they may use them for some assessments in their totality. But it's really important they are modifying where it's appropriate to support their own cohorts. There is also really important the assessment planning, that the concentration right now is in learning and teaching, but also that young people understand when they will follow assessments and what that assessment will look like and how it is going to determine a final provisional grade. We then come to the marking part of that, and that again comes back to the understanding standards, understanding what constitutes the appropriate evidence, the cross-marking that has to take place in schools, and then the sampling and moderation both within schools, across schools, supported by local authorities and supported as appropriate by the RICs. SQA will do their own sampling as part of that process. And if we go through all of that, along with the appropriate sense checks, and that we revisit across schools the assessment methodologies, the marking and so on, we should get to a place where, with everyone working together, that young people get the outcomes that their work deserves and that fits the opportunity they have had throughout what has been a disrupted year. And if we can all do that, then we should have a degree of confidence that we'll get to an outcome which meets the needs of almost all young people. And we alluded to it earlier, there will always be some, and that's where any appeals process will hopefully pick that up. Thank you.
Thank you. I think Ms Robertson wants to come back in just before we come back to Mr Johnson.
But just to say, you know, Mr Quinn's just highlighted, I think very succinctly, the approach that we are taking this year as set out in the alternative certification model, and the importance, the critical importance of the system working together to deliver for learners, and the critical role also of schools, local authorities, regional improvement collaboratives supported by resources, guidance and quality assurance from SQA. So, you know, I just wanted to highlight, you know, just that point about the system working together to get this right. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mr Johnson?
Yeah, I'd just like to ask, I'm very mindful of time, but just a brief clarification. I mean, Mr Quinn just set out that essentially what is being sought is an assessment model where candidates get the grade they deserve. But can I ask what the benchmark is for that? And what I mean by that is that obviously we've had a very disrupted year. Different pupils will have had varying access to education and teaching. Different schools will have been able to deliver different amounts just because of how those particular schools have been impacted by the virus. So what is being tested? Is it the knowledge across the full syllabus for each course, or is it on the basis of what has actually been able to be taught in that particular school to that particular pupil? Because is it the 70% that they were able to deliver, or is it the full 100% that's the intention for the course syllabus? If you understand that distinction.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Johnson. First of all, we should recognise that the full course will not be completed this year, and SQA recognised that at the outset, and therefore the course content across subject areas has been modified to take into account that there was always going to be a disruption to learning for everyone. So that's already in place. What I think schools will do is they need to ensure that they are meeting the national standard, that they are sampling assessment tools that go across breadth and depth of course coverage. But of course within that, you do sample. You cannot ask a question on every single area of any course. That's not the way assessments work. So schools will have the opportunity to ensure that they are meeting national standard. They are using a breadth, depth and coverage of the course. But remember, that is a modified course that has been modified to all across the system.
Thank you. Mr. Johnson?
I mean, I recognise the point about sampling. That's slightly different to what I'm asking, though, because even with the modified course, not all schools and not all pupils will have been able to cover that to the same extent. It's not a level playing field. And is that lack of a level playing field being taken into account? That's my key question, even on the basis of the modified course.
Mr. Quinn, do you want to come back on that?
Yeah. Again, Mr. Johnson, just to reiterate then, sorry if I didn't make it clear enough, I think schools have got the opportunity that they will, where they feel appropriate, put their own assessment pieces together, which again I must stress and reiterate, meet national standard and have got course coverage and depth. But they also have that, if you're making your assessment, you have the opportunity to determine what is in that assessment piece, but you still have to make sure you meet the national standard. And that's where the moderation comes in across, and the validation of the assessment tools across the local authorities and across the RIC to ensure that the examination, the assessment piece that you're giving to that young person is fair and is as equitable as the assessment piece that another young person is getting in another school.
Ms. Robertson, you want to come in on this point?
Yeah, just to add to what Stephen has said, I think there's a crucial piece of work that we undertook right at the start of the year, which was the start of the academic year, which was really an anticipation of disruption to learning, which I think is where Mr. Johnson is focusing, and understandably so. Of course, it has been a disrupted period for young people at such a crucial stage in their education life. So we undertook modifications which were focused on the evidence requirements, and we stripped those right back. And we stripped those right back subject by subject to seek to ensure that young people could complete that work comfortably during the course of the year. And the message, obviously, following the First Minister's announcement on the 4th of January was that the focus should be on learning and teaching. We've also highlighted 2 to 4 pieces of evidence which Stephen has talked about, which will be critical to the judgments that are made about grades and attainment, demonstrated attainment by young people throughout the course of the year. And I think the NQ 2021 group, of which Stephen is a member, has been very clear that demonstrated attainment does still need to be at the heart of the approach that we take. So evidence is key here. But what we have sought to do is really strip back our requirements as much as possible, bearing in mind the circumstances of this year, so that young people can complete the work that they need to do. And that Stephen rightly highlights that there is some flexibility in the assessment approach that schools and colleges take to ensure that it meets their circumstances. We produce understanding standards materials across all our subjects, and there's a number of events also going on just to support teachers understand the standards. So the difference between an A grade and a B grade, the types of evidence that you'd be looking for, and in any particular context. And we hope that is also very helpful in assisting with the local moderation that Stephen highlights, supported, of course, with additional national quality assurance as well.
Mr Johnson, are you content that I move on?
I am, but I'm hoping colleagues will ask about quality assurance.
Oh, OK, if there is time, I will bring you back in at the end, but I'm going to move to Mr Greer to be followed by Ms Mackay.
Thank you, Convener. I'd just like to, all my questions in the first instance are for the SQA, and I'd like to pick up on Fiona Robertson's answer to Ian Gray confirming that there'll be public consultation on the appeals process. So it was confirmed that that will start probably in the next week or two. Would Ms Robertson be able to confirm when the decision will be made on the appeals process, when the SQA will be able to confirm how that process will operate?
Ms Robertson?
So the appeals, as I've highlighted, the appeals process will go live in the next week or so. Then there'll be a short period of consultation, and we will work through the consultation responses. But I would hope that we will be able to confirm our position around the appeals process at late April, early May at the latest. And I'm very happy, Mr Greer, if the committee would welcome it, just when we publish the appeals process, the appeals consultation, just to set out those issues in more detail to the committee, if that would be helpful.
I think that might be helpful. I'm not sure how that fits in with election campaigns and elections, but nonetheless would be grateful if that could be given to the clerks. Mr Greer?
Yes, thank you, Convener. I think that definitely would be appreciated. As the Convener highlights, though, in 22 days, our ability to engage in this process is severely curtailed for some time. Could I ask, though, it'll be 7 months tomorrow since the last year's results were released. It's 4 months since the 2021 exams were cancelled. Why is this consultation process only taking place now? Why did this not start months ago?
Ms Robertson?
Well, we've been taking forward work around, as I've highlighted, modifications to assessment, working through 23,000 responses to that consultation and publishing those last October. We've also critically been seeking to ensure that we have the alternative certification model in place with all the guidance around gathering evidence and also assessment resources across in excess of 140 national qualifications courses. And Mr Gray will know that SQA is also responsible for qualifications, higher national and vocational qualifications in the college sector. So it's also been very important to ensure that that work is taken forward too. So it felt important to SQA, in discussion with the National Qualifications Group, which of course is convening and co-creating this work, that the work on the alternative certification model, with all the guidance and all the materials and modifications were in place, and that's what we've sought to do. And I think we're in a strong position. Looking at other parts of the UK, we're in a strong position there in schools having all that material at hand. Of course, I accept the appeals process is important, and we've been taking that forward as quickly as possible, and that will go live, as I say, shortly.
Thank you. Am I to take it from that answer that it was a capacity issue that you decided to prioritise, and I accept that that's a perfectly fair line of argument. The prioritisation was on getting the alternative assessment model agreed and rolled out across the range of qualifications you offer. So it was down to capacity. You would have done both. You would have got started on this consultation on the appeals process had the capacity been there, but with the capacity you had, you needed to prioritise the assessment model itself.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that we prioritised the development and conclusion of all the details in the interest of learners on the alternatives, and schools and colleges and practitioners on the alternative certification model. And I have to say, everyone's been working really very hard to do that. The guidance that I've set out across all those courses and the modifications to all the national qualifications courses, in tandem with the work that we do for the college sector around HNVQ qualifications, it's not trivial. So we've been working very hard to take that forward. I can give Mr. Greer and the committee that assurance that we've been working hard to take all that work forward to deliver for the system.
Thanks. I don't underestimate for a second the scale of work, given the range of qualifications, though given the money that was saved and returned to the Scottish Government because last year's exams didn't take place, I would have maybe tried to hold on to that to increase your capacity in recent months. Can I ask about the submission of evidence that's required from schools? So I understand that the 25th of June is the deadline for the final submission of estimated grades. Can you confirm what are the deadlines for the production, the submission of evidence? Is that roughly by the end of May that schools need to have submitted that?
Yeah, so we published on the 16th of February. We published on the 16th of February the five key stages with revised timelines. That was originally published before Christmas, but obviously with the move to remote learning after Christmas, it was important that we worked with the National Qualifications Group to agree a set of revised timelines. So I'm happy to take Mr. Greer through that. But so stage one until April is teachers and lecturers access subject-specific guidance, which we've discussed, assessment resources and understanding the standards, materials and webinars from SQA, and obviously learning and teaching continues. Stage two, which is April into May, school, college, training provider and local authority quality assurance continues, and Mr. Quinn has talked about some of the work that's already going on across local authorities to do that. And during May, SQA requests, reviews and provides feedback on assessment evidence from each school, college and training provider. We'll be providing more information to centres about that process very, very shortly. From the end of May...
Sorry, I don't mean to be rude. So I have read through that process, and I think it'd probably be helpful. I could save you a little bit of time for just tell you why I was asking that question. Yes, my understanding is essentially nothing will be required of pupils after the end of May. At that point, it's for schools and the SQA to engage on the submission of grade estimates. I'm just trying to get an understanding of the evidence that pupils are required to submit. Yeah. Will that essentially end at the end of May?
No, I mean learning and teaching will continue across, and Stephen Quinn may want to come in here. But learning and teaching obviously will continue till the end of term. And what we've sought to do in pushing back the timelines is to maximise learning and teaching. Learning and teaching comes first. Learning and teaching comes first before assessment. And that's really, really important. And that's been something that the National Qualifications Group and it would be my view, and Gail Gorman's also in the National Qualifications Group, it's in the view of the group that learning and teaching comes first, and that is the focus. And learning and teaching will continue beyond the quality assurance process is an iterative process of ongoing review. The final evidence does not need to be provided during May. We will be sampling a range of evidence to look to see whether that evidence has been assessed to standard. But not all the learning and teaching needs to be done before that happens. And we think that's important because, you know, learning and teaching has been constrained this year, and it's really important that young people get the opportunity to do learning, because that learning is critical for further progression, and whether a young person is leaving school or whether they're continuing at school. So that's critical. So the short answer to your question is no.
Okay, bring in Mr. Quinn. Sorry, Mr. Gray, can I bring in Mr. Quinn just before we go back to you? Sorry.
Thanks, Convener. So I think Fiona has actually answered it towards the end. Just to give Mr. Greer absolute clarity in that, the assessment pieces at schools will be working towards with the young people will take place right up until into June. All that will happen in May is SQ will ask for some sampling of initial assessment pieces that they have a confidence that the process is working in schools. But children and young people will continue to learn and will continually to have their assessment up until as long as is possible towards the end of June to get those provisional grades in. That gives us the additional learning time and therefore the better opportunity for young people to achieve in their assessments. Thank you.
Thanks. Mr. Greer.
Thank you. Yeah, I've had a number of teachers and pupils get in touch, particularly recently once we've had greater clarity on what the return is going to look like and the timescale that's on. Essentially, their concern is that there'll be a number of pupils who are going to likely to return to school by the time they're back with any consistency. It'll be into April, and they'll face a period of weeks, a rather intense few weeks of regular assessment under what to them, to the pupil, will feel very much like exam conditions. So can I ask what assessment's been made of the cumulative impact on mental health and well-being of young people of the now inevitably condensed period of time in which this has to take place?
Ms. Robertson, do you want to go first with that? Thank you.
Yes, and colleagues may want to come in here as well. I mean, I think we're all very conscious of the fact that this year has been disrupted, and there are some constraints remaining in the remainder of the school year. But what we've sought to do is to provide as much flexibility as possible. With the National Qualifications Group gave a very clear steer, for example, around prelims. And the need for a variety of approaches to be deployed around assessment, and I know my local authority colleagues will be very cognisant of those health and wellbeing issues. We've also obviously looked at some of these issues in the context of the Equalities Impact Assessment and Children's Rights and Wellbeing Impact Assessment. But Stephen and Carrie may want to come in more substantively on those issues around how local authorities are managing some of these issues as they consider the return to school. One thing that we've been really clear about in the National Qualifications Group is that when schools return, the consolidation of learning will be key. So ongoing learning and teaching will be key, and we're certainly not seeking to have an assessment bulge towards the end of the year. It certainly undermines the notion of exams being cancelled for all the right reasons. So I think it's an important point, and I think schools are doing all that they can to ensure that these issues are considered.
I'm not seeing any other panel members indicating they'd like to come in. I'll just pause for a moment. If you could put an R in the chat, if you do. No, we'll go back to Mr. Greer.
Thank you. I appreciate the primary responsibility around the well-being of young people is with the school and the local authority. They're there to directly support them, but clearly decisions that are made at a national policy level around how assessments are conducted this year have that impact. So it's welcome to hear that that's been factored into the equality impact assessment. So maybe give them a read over. One more question that relates somewhat to Daniel Johnson's line of questioning. The NASUWT pointed out, now I've not checked this for all science subjects, but they pointed out that there are science subjects where there are no topic areas that have been removed. So they're raising concerns, same concerns the EIS have raised, around the volume of work that's expected to be completed, and that pupils can obviously only be assessed on what they've learned, and that we've still got some subjects essentially that there's an expectation that more learning is delivered than is realistic. So can I ask how you've ensured consistency so that pupils aren't disadvantaged because the range of subjects that individual pupil happens to have taken is a range of subjects that's ended up with a heavier assessment burden this year? I accept what was said before, that subjects are assessed differently and there's inevitably not complete consistency across the board, but what we don't want this year is a completely different kind of inconsistency based on how the subjects were adapted to fit these unique circumstances.
Ms Robertson?
So I would go back to our consultation on these issues, Mr Greer, where we looked at, we provided some propositions around modifications, and we got feedback from many practitioners, but also young people and parents around those modifications. And we published, I think on the 8th of October, details around that, which included a document which was effectively "you said, we did." So reflecting on the feedback that we got and the action that we took, and there were many instances where the feedback that we got changed the approach that we took to our modifications. In relation to science specifically, a big element of change in the science subjects was coursework, practical coursework removal, really to reflect the public health reality that coursework would be difficult to conclude both if and when young people were undertaking periods of remote learning and teaching, but also with social distancing, etc. in place. And there were some obviously health concerns around practical experiments. But that removal of coursework freed up time for remaining elements. So we've sought to take a proportionate approach across the subjects. But in the sciences and a number of other subjects too, the nature of assessment is synoptic. And by that I mean that you're looking at a range of elements in undertaking assessment. So it's not topic by topic. You're looking at a range of issues in any assessment approach. And for those subjects, it can therefore be quite difficult to remove elements in the way that in others it may be more straightforward. I'm happy to elaborate a bit on that, but I think we've worked really hard to ensure coherence of approach across all the subjects, and there are a considerable number of subjects that we offer, but cognizant of the differences in assessment which are well established and which Stephen Quinn and others alluded to earlier. Thank you.
Mr Greer, are you content to move on, or?
I've got one more very brief question if there's time, convener, and it may just simply...
Very briefly, yes, please. But we are now getting to the point of running out of time, so please.
Yeah, I think in this instance I would just offer Ms Robertson maybe to follow this one up in writing if she'd prefer, but it's been flagged up to me, this was last week, it might have changed since then, I've not been able to locate the specific document, but the drama marking scheme is essentially unchanged. It doesn't mention the effect of things like masks and social distancing, which obviously have a significant impact on performance. I wonder if you'd be able to confirm if this is being updated, if you're aware of it, or if the person who flagged it up to me was perhaps mistaken and that has already happened.
I'll perhaps come, if I may, Mr Greer, I'll come back to you with a more substantial answer. But I think what we certainly have done for many practical subjects is effectively a second round of modifications, bearing in mind the current circumstances. And so for example, in music, young people are able to record themselves playing, so they don't have to physically be in school. And there are some analogies there with drama and how you judge performance elements. But I'm happy to come back on the specifics there, and also which level, because of course there's drama offered at different for different qualifications levels as well. So I'm happy to come back on that. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think we'll move on to Ms Mackay to be followed by Mr Gibson, please.
Thank you, Convener, and I'll be very brief. My first question really relates to the one that Ross Greer asked at the start, relating to the public consultation on the appeals process. If I'm just to clarify, if I'm understanding this correctly, the consultation starts this month and it ends next month, so a maximum period of 4 weeks. And if that's the case, how is it done? Is that consultation with parents, with teachers and pupils? And what do you hope to gain by such a short consultation? Sorry, that's to Ms Robertson.
Yeah, I think we would all recognise that our aspirations around consultation period during this time can be difficult to meet, and we took it forward. I mean, we undertook a very quite a constrained public consultation around modifications to assessment last August, a 2-week consultation, and we're probably looking at something quite similar for the appeals process, but seeking to engage as part of that as much as possible. I mean, if I may, I will come back to the committee with a more detailed timeline around the appeals consultation, which may be helpful to the committee to ensure that there's a wider understanding of that. But I think that an aspiration which many of us have around consultations of 12-week consultations, I think you would all accept will not be possible here, but we will seek to engage as much as we can during that process of consultation. But I'll come back to the committee, if I may, with a more detailed timeline.
Thank you, Ms Robertson, that would be helpful. My next question is to Gail Gorman, please, in Education Scotland. It's to ask how Education Scotland is holding local authorities to account on individual school performance regarding remote learning and return to school catch-up, and how much oversight does Education Scotland have in regard to provision becoming a postcode lottery, and I'm talking about in regard to affluent and less affluent areas. And I'd just be grateful to know if you are monitoring individual schools and local authorities.
Thank you for that question. Equity, of course, is something that has been a challenge and an issue in education globally for some time, but something we've been really concerned about, particularly if you look at the child poverty figures in Scotland before the pandemic, and of course some of the acceleration of that during and after the pandemic, as we predict. I'm going to hand over to my colleague Janie McManus, who can give you some of those details from our inspectorate work, because that sits very separately in the Scrutiny Directorate. But certainly the reports, which have been weekly now, 7 weeks of reports, have looked at not only children, young people and their experience in school, parental views around the variation there, also looking in last week's report at the quality assurance of local authorities to pick up that breadth and depth you were referring to. And going forward in March and into April, we're extending that work into looking at FE and the work of colleges across all 27 colleges around and looking at equity, remote learning, quality of learning and teaching. But Janie will say a bit more.
Thank you.
Ms McManus, thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Gail. Yes, in terms of the quality assurance, we first of all, when we looked at the local authority phasing plans back in June last year to look at their arrangements for, at that point, a blended learning model, We looked at each local authority's arrangements for doing that. We provided local authorities with individual feedback in terms of pulling that together, should that have been required for August. But since January, as Gail has highlighted, we've been carrying out national overviews of practice, and we've been building these up on a weekly basis, and we've been producing reports on a weekly basis so that we can look at what's happening on the ground through engaging with schools and engaging with local authorities. We've also engaged with parents and learners to get their views around what the experience of remote learning has felt like for them. So each week since January, we've been publishing weekly reports and overviews about what's happening. In each of those reports, we've set out a series of recommendations for areas that the system, everyone in the system, needs to look at to ensure that children and young people are getting the best possible experience that they can under extremely challenging circumstances. A key focus for us in the national overviews was to begin with local authorities, and that's what we did. We looked at the arrangements that local authorities had in place for ensuring the quality of remote learning within their locality. And then we did a deeper look at what was happening in schools, and we then revisited schools to look at how they were taking account of the entitlements for remote learning that had been published in January. And we were really pleased to see that improvements have been made along the way. But also in this period, and starting last week, we published our first of our next phase of reports, which is looking at some of the recommendations that we have set out previously. And we're taking a closer look at how local authorities and schools have been tackling these and exemplifying where there's really strong practice. And we hope that by sharing where there is strong practice, that other local authorities and schools can learn from that practice to improve their own approaches as well. And as Gail said last week, we identified quality assurance of local authorities is one of the first areas we looked at in January, and one of the first in this second phase, to look at the different approaches that local authorities are taking to quality assurance and actually to assuring the quality of learning and teaching that children and young people in their locality are experienced over this period of remote learning.
Thanks. Thank you. Can I just ask you to very briefly, because it's a big subject and we don't have time to, but in your findings so far, has there been a marked difference between results in affluent areas and less affluent areas?
We haven't particularly looked to that area. As these are national reports, we've pulled out national messages from there. We've looked at the different approaches that schools have taken, particularly to meeting children and young people's needs. We've also been really focused on, it's been really pleasing for us to see that the approaches that schools and local authorities have been taking, particularly for vulnerable children and young people, particularly around pastoral support and particularly around understanding the needs of children and families, and the different approaches that they've been putting into place particularly for participation and engagement, and how they're tailoring that, particularly for those children and families that are harder to reach. But as these are pulled together into national reports, it's national messages that we've been giving out.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Convener. That's me.
Mr. Gibson.
Yes, thank you, Convener. Good morning, panel. I know that in some prosperous areas of Scotland, and perhaps those that are not so prosperous, even primary schools require security during parents' evenings. And that's because parents with high expectations can put huge pressure on teachers when those parents feel their children are not doing as well as the parents expect. And sometimes this pressure even comes from teachers with children at the same school or employees of the same local authority. So is it not the case that with teacher assessments now replacing exams, even more pressure will be placed on teachers to award grades which not all pupils merit? And obviously the children of parents who do not lobby teachers will be at a disadvantage given the relentless pressure imposed on behalf of others. So I'm just wondering, how will this pressure be countered to ensure equity in the assessment process and indeed protect teachers in the process. I'm wondering if Janie McManus could perhaps respond on that one, please.
I'll bring in Miss McManus, but I'm conscious it's maybe Miss Lindsay who is more appropriate to answer that question, Mr. Gibson. Miss McManus.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, I was going to, Convener, thank you for that. I think it'd be Miss Lindsay that would answer that one. Thank you.
Miss Lindsay.
Thanks, Convener. I'm going to pass to Stephen in a minute, so we're just passing around to the most appropriate person, but just to make a couple of comments. First of all, I think that certainly not experienced security required to make sure that parents behave. We would hope that everybody that's coming into a school takes that responsibility on to make sure that they are behaving in a way that's acceptable to everybody. But I understand that sometimes there can be pressure that is put on teachers from parents who feel that things are not going the way that they would like, and sometimes that is a difficult situation, so I absolutely accept that. I think that we strive for equity in everything that we do for our children and young people, but we know that society doesn't always allow that to happen in just the way we would want, because of resources, because of poverty, because of the society and geographical boundaries in which we live. But that is part of the job of a school, is to try to ensure equity in everything that we do, because our children and young people are all important to us. In terms of equity and part of the assessment process, I'm going to hand over to Stephen for that. He has outlined a little bit already about the moderation process, but I'll hand over to Stephen just to respond to that.
Mr. Quinn.
Thank you, Convener. Thank you, Mr. Gibson, for that question. I think it's a really, really important one, and one that we've actually looked at quite seriously. One of the principles of the alternative certification model in terms of the quality assurance that both local authorities in terms of schools and central teams, and with the support of RICS where appropriate, and indeed with SQA, is to ensure that it's not ultimately one teacher who is determining the provisional grade for that young person. And without getting into a great deal of depth, what I really mean by that is that the teacher needs to be supported through all of this process. Yes, they have carried out the learning and teaching, and they may mark a piece of assessment. But of course, across that department, that assessment may be marked by different teachers. Now, what is also important here is that then there is a cross-marking, there is a checking process, and that the quality assurance procedures within the school in the first instance allow that checking to take place, that there is a consistency of marking across the piece. In addition to that, the local authority has to have processes in place which allow sampling across schools, and especially where it is a small department with maybe only one or two teachers in that department. That the SQA have their part to play in the sampling process that they do, so that they are comfortable that the school's processes are correct. And at the end of that process, the local authority are comfortable with the school's process, the head teacher is comfortable with the department's process, and the department with each individual teacher. Now, if we do that, when it comes to, as you suggest, a parent perhaps not being happy with the outcome, the teacher has the level of protection, and it is not them that has determined that provisional grade. That provisional grade has been determined by the process, which many people have been involved in. And that is critical to all of this, as we cannot place the burden of responsibility only on the class teacher. That is unfair. And I am grateful that you brought that question up today. Thank you.
And I'm actually very reassured by that. I think that's a very comprehensive response, actually, Mr. Quinn. One of the issues, obviously, about assessment relative to exams, which is why I've now been a great big fan of assessment, is that I know that some parents help their children with assessments. For example, not only by paying for tutors, but sometimes by helping the children with their own portfolios and indeed homework, etc., etc. Whereas other parents don't, for a variety of reasons, maybe because they cannot, they don't have the education themselves, or extremely busy, etc. So given the fact that the position we're in, how can we ensure that the attainment gap does not actually grow during the current period? Because obviously the exams are something which a parent can't come in and actually sit for the child.
I think that's, again, I'll go to Miss Lindsay first, but if the other panel members wish to come in this, please do put an R in the chat.
Thanks, Convener, and I think that we take it really seriously about the excellence and equity agenda across Scotland in all of our schools, and the gap is something that changes. So we talk about the gap in attainment in education, but we may have to make sure that our schools are looking for a new gap that might have arisen because of the pandemic that we've been in. So different families may have found themselves in different situations and unable to cope during the pandemic. And some families actually that we thought might struggle have actually found this situation to be more aligned to their way of living their lives, so that they don't have as much routine, but they still manage to get through the work that's required. So it's incumbent on all of us in schools across Scotland to make sure that we are identifying exactly what that gap is, as you say, and that we need to make sure that we provide that support for our children and young people where that is required. So I absolutely understand your comment about, some parents are able to access tutors or are able to give a bit more support, and that would be the same at any point in the school calendar, not just in a pandemic situation. So we are aware of that, and that's why there are a number of study groups. There's the eSchool that we talked about earlier. There are a range of things that we would be offering to some of our young people. Teachers are professionals, that they know their children and their families really well, and they always want to make sure that they are trying to narrow that gap so that the young people who need that extra support will actually be able to receive that. So we will continue to work in that way and try to make sure that we do close that gap wherever possible.
Okay, now last year, obviously, there was a huge political pressure to ensure that no child lost out as a result of lockdown, and understandably, there was, in reality, grade inflation, and there's likely to be grade inflation this year. I mean, I think that's just a fact of the matter. How, therefore, can we ensure that children who are in lower years of school but who will be sitting exams next year and the year after are not penalised? They've also went through lockdown. There perhaps will not be the same grade inflation in their favour as we've seen this last year, and probably will see this year. So how will we ensure that we restore some equity to the Scottish education system and ensure that standards are maintained as we go forward?
Conscious, I think I missed Mr. Quinn from the last set of questions, so I'll bring in Mr. Quinn first, and then I'll go to Fiona Robertson for that. Thanks.
Thank you, Convener. It was just for clarity for Mr. Gibson in the previous question, that when he talks about where parents can support their young people, it's just to give them an assurance that what we're looking at is the assessment pieces that a young person will deliver on this year will be assessed in controlled conditions. So it will not be assessment that they produce themselves, bring from home, etc. It will be assessment in controlled conditions in the school. Thank you.
Ms. Robertson?
Yes, I was going to make the same point as Mr. Quinn there, just around the guidance that we provide to schools around the assessment conditions and the expectation around controlled conditions and how that's managed. In relation to Mr. Gibson's, the second part of Mr. Gibson's questions, I think I said at committee, I think on a number of occasions that we have a duty to the young people of last year, this year and next year, and that's why the standards are so important, that it's not only about an A being an A in Arran being the same as an A in Aberdeen, but also that we look across years as well, and that's why the standards and integrity of qualifications are so important. And obviously it is a different assessment approach this year following the cancellation of exams. And what we've sought to do, and I think we've highlighted that, and as have ADES colleagues throughout the committee session today, is highlighted the work that we're doing around understanding standards, so that the standards are understood, and using as much material and events, etc., to help teachers ensure that they do understand the standard. The work that Stephen's just highlighted around your first question about cross-marking, around the checks and balances, if you like, that are in place within schools and within local authorities, combined with the work that we are doing to sample evidence, to check on standards. So we're doing as much as we can around the integrity of the awards this year, but very mindful of the challenges that young people have faced. But I think as we've highlighted right throughout the session, by working together, that's critical in delivering results that are fair and credible.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you. I'm very conscious of time, but we do have 5 members I promised to go back to and ask them to be very brief in the questions and hopefully with something that answers as well. I've got to begin with Ian Gray, to be followed by Mr Green, and I wonder if I could just ask Mr Johnson to briefly take over chairing for a few moments. Thank you.
Of course. Can I bring in Mr Gray?
No, I didn't have any further questions.
That was nice and straightforward. Can I bring in Mr Greer? Was it Mr Greer, I think, the committee said? Or Green, sorry. Jamie Green.
Thank you, Deputy Convener. I'll use up Mr Gray's time allocation then. Can I ask the panel, of course, as we emerge from the pandemic in education, and it's further to the line of questioning around what happens next, it's really important that I think teachers, pupils and parents have confidence in the institutions governing both the delivery of education and the awards system. And that remains so. However, of course, both chief executives of both Education Scotland and the SQA will probably have followed with great interest the parliamentary debate recently, where there was a vote and a motion on the actions of both agencies. And unfortunately, the wording of that was quite clear, and I will paraphrase it for you in the interest of time, but we said as a parliament that we believe that the support services and decision making by Education Scotland and the SQA have not met the expectations or requirements of teachers, pupils or parents, and considers that there's compelling evidence that neither body is fit for purpose and that they have lost the confidence of teachers, pupils and parents. Now, that motion passed by a majority in the Parliament. Obviously, you weren't party to that debate, and therefore there is slight disadvantage in that respect. But I would offer you this opportunity to respond to that parliamentary motion now.
Before I hand that to the panellists, and I think obviously it's fair to comment, obviously the decisions regarding the structures for education are a matter for policy and politicians. But I think if maybe the panellists wish to refer to any of the points or observations or criticisms that were raised during that debate, I would ask them to do so. Can I bring in Gail Gorman?
Thank you, Deputy Convener, and thank you, Mr Gray, for the opportunity to comment. And I'm conscious of time, so I'll do so briefly. We did, of course, follow the debate with interest, and actually with disappointment, because Education Scotland has not only, since some of the comments that mainly reference previous roles in Education Scotland, has restructured, been redesigned, has a new delivery model, a new approach and a new corporate plan for the recovery phase. And actually the work of the Education Scotland team has been to support and deliver improvement across Scottish education during these challenging times. We have provided the national platform, which is over 500,000 users currently, which we've adapted, upgraded, introduced new technology and led approaches to remote learning across Scotland. Our Digital Learn Scotland has over 238,000 users of our professional learning, supporting teachers to deliver during this pandemic. Our professional learning support for teachers, including Headspace, Blethers, Stepping Stones, personal coaching and mentoring, reflective supervision and webinars, have been absolutely block booked every single time we've released any support. Our subject support has continued with over every single subject, support for remote learning, wakelets, subject webinars, subject guidance, and our direct support to individual schools, local authorities and RICS, working alongside, supporting, adding capacity, supporting strategic leadership and developing contacts with schools across Scotland has absolutely been fed back as making a significant difference. And that's without beginning to think about our central role in SERG, supporting SERG members, working collaboratively with them to deliver guidance and support at a time of great uncertainty across Scottish education. And indeed, the SSTA in their submission to this committee recommend and recognise the role Education Scotland has played in reducing the pressure on the system through our work in stopping inspections early, supporting and addressing the needs of schools and supporting teaching and learning, and welcomed our detailed guidance and support materials coming from Education Scotland. So some of that debate I certainly didn't recognise, and I know my teams and those we support do. Of course, we're all learning through the pandemic, but actually the newly restructured, newly led, redesigned and new recovery year corporate plan shows a very different way of working than perhaps that was previously taking place in the organisation. Thank you for the opportunity to respond.
Thank you. I'm not seeing... Sorry, Daniel.
I was just about to say, I'm not seeing any other requests to respond, but with the convener back, I will also hand over the chair back to the convener. Apologies if I interrupted you there, convener.
Okay, no, not at all. Thank you very much. Can I bring in Ms Robertson, please?
Thank you. Yes, I would also like to respond, and I would share the sentiments expressed by Gail Gorman there. Obviously, we were very aware of the political debate around both Education Scotland and SQA, and I suppose I would just like to highlight that I'm very proud to lead a dedicated team of public servants, many of whom are teachers and lecturers themselves, to deliver on what has been a very challenging brief over the last year, with the cancellation of exams just weeks away from exams being held in 2020, and as we've worked very much with the system in 2021 to deliver an alternative certification model across national qualifications, but at the same time deliver modifications to a huge range of qualifications which are available to learners across Scotland. And SQA doesn't sit apart from the system. It is very much part of the system. In a normal year, we would be working with many thousands of teachers as our appointees. We continue to work with teachers in developing the approach, and we get really very positive feedback about the work that we are doing. We've had to review almost everything that we do in very short order, and with a huge amount of scrutiny, perfectly acceptable scrutiny, but we've had to be very fleet of foot to ensure that we can continue to deliver. That has been challenging, but I think I share that sense of disappointment about some of the commentary on the work that's been undertaken. But as Gail has also said, it is important that we're a learning organisation, and of course we will learn and reflect on the circumstances of the last year as we move forward. But I think all parts of the public sector will be doing that as we consider issues going forward. But I must stress that we've worked very, very hard during the course of the last year to deliver. Thank you.
Can I bring in Mr. Green? I'm really sorry, we're really short of time. Are you content to move on?
Yes, I was just going to thank. I just wanted to give both organisations the opportunity to formally respond on the record, given that they obviously didn't have the opportunity to do so in that debate, and thank them for their response.
Thank you. Can I bring in Ms Wishart to be followed by Mr Greer?
Thanks, Convener. My question's about prelims, and as part of the process of evidence gathering, and we know that some schools are still intending to go forward with prelims, and it's already been said, I think Ms Robertson, you said about the variety of approaches and prelims were included in that. I just wondered if you could expand a bit on the reason for still including prelims, because some parents have been in touch with us, referencing the anxiety on their young people, and also referencing the fact that some pupils might be experiencing bereavement and are grieving. So it's just an understanding of why prelims are still in the mix.
Ms Robertson?
Yeah, we the National Qualifications Group issued some communications in relation to prelims, making it clear that prelims were not a requirement of the alternative certification model this year, and that schools and colleges may wish to take a variety of approaches to assessment. And I go back to the guidance that we've provided on the assessment approaches, that have the guidance that we've produced around evidence gathering and assessment. So there is no expectation or requirement from either SQA or other parts of the National Qualifications Group, which includes ADES, for that prelims should or need to take place. That said, some schools, it is a matter for schools to consider, and I know that some schools have continued with that approach and wish to do so, and that is a matter for them, but it is not a requirement of the model. And the nature of prelims is that they are preliminary examinations, and so it is absolutely a school decision to take.
Thanks, Convener. I was just going to ask if Ms Robertson had any understanding of the number of schools that might be taking prelims. It would be helpful if she could provide that answer to committee.
I'm sure Ms Robertson will do so.
Ms Wishart, that's not something that the SQA would be able to provide. That perhaps would be something that my ADES colleagues could consider. As I say, we have a flexible approach to curriculum delivery and design in Scotland, and it's for schools in any year, including this year, to consider whether they have prelim exams or not. We've made it clear that there's no requirement, and we do not collect that information. I don't know if ADES colleagues would wish to add to that. That's not something that's not information that we hold.
I think in the interest of time, we can maybe take that to a letter to ADES and to local authorities, try and establish if that detail is actually being collated and it can be available to the committee going forward. I'm going to go to Mr Greer and finally to Mr Johnson. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. This is for Education Scotland. I think it was a response that from Gail Gorman to Rona Mackay's line of question, where Rona Mackay asked if there had been any notable difference in the quality of remote learning between more and less affluent areas, and the response was that's not something that's been looked at because it's a national approach being taken. Given the amount of discussion that's taken place about the levels of digital poverty and exclusion in this country, how acutely aware we all are of the differential impact of last year, can I just ask why that wasn't looked at, and will that now be looked into?
Convener, that didn't. Thank you. That didn't come from myself. That was Janie was commenting on what some of the core questions have been thus far. But I'll allow Janie to come back in and talk about how we have got that information. What we haven't done is had a specific report around it, but it is absolutely central, as Mr Greer says, to the work that we're doing and the feedback that we're giving to partners through the work of CERG and also through the HMIE reports. But I'll let Ms McManus come back in.
Ms McManus.
Thanks, Gail. I think for the purposes of these reports, we were pulling together some national information and overviews around remote learning. We weren't particularly looking at particular areas and particular areas of deprivation. What we can say is, in part of our work, when we have been looking at how schools have been responding, particularly to meeting needs of learners and for pupils, including those who are more vulnerable, is around the planning that schools are taking place to adapt learning that meets the different needs of learners as part of that remote learning offer. But what we have seen is it's not consistent in terms of the approach that we're taking. In terms of all of our approaches and evaluating approaches, aspects around equity, aspects around closing the poverty-related gap are very high on our agenda. We are pulling together information, particularly on approaches to closing the poverty-related attainment gap over the course of recent years, and will be sharing that evidence shortly to look at the progress that has been made. What we can see is that the awareness that schools have across the particular needs of children and young people is very, very clear. That schools and teachers are much more aware of the needs of individual cohorts. They are looking very much closely at particular interventions that are going to support children and young people from disadvantage to make progress in their learning, and we've seen a huge improvement in that in recent years as well. And it's been really high on the agenda of teachers that as they are tailoring teaching and learning approaches, very much so during remote learning, to look at the supports that they can put in place for individual learners. So I think just to reiterate that when I was talking about the reports, we were looking at particularly pulling those reports together as part of a national overview rather than a comparator report. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to bring Mr Quinn in and then go back to Ms Gorman, please.
It's okay, Convener. That was in response to the previous question, but as you said, we're running out of time, so we can answer that in writing.
Thank you. Ms Gorman?
It was just briefly, Convener, to add that I should have said that obviously I think at the last committee I mentioned about the work that we've done around the equity audit and the central role that Education Scotland had in gathering that information, collating the information and then drawing out the substantive evidence in that report, as well as the work that we've done around the Scottish Attainment Challenge impact reports, which look specifically at obviously deprivation areas and the challenge funding and the use of that. So I should have mentioned that in the introduction to Ms McManus. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr Greer, you content to move on?
Yes, thanks, and my apologies to Ms Gorman for misattributing who'd originally responded to that line of questioning.
That's okay. And finally, Mr Johnson, do you still have a supplementary?
Yes, and I'm happy if this is responded in writing, but essentially it's around the quality assurance process. And I've read on the SQA website that the details around banding and standards, but when I look at the quality assurance page, I'm happy to be directed to where the detail is. It seems to be very high level in that it sets out that quality assurance will establish. External verification will establish against previous expectations for centres, and it sets out that there'll be three verification outcomes: accepted, asterisk, and not accepted. I was really just hoping that the SQA would be able to provide more detail as to precisely how that assessment would be made in terms of looking at the evidence provided and how that compares the tolerances and indeed the format of external verification meetings and how those processes might work. Is that documented, or is that documentation that will come out? And obviously, this is bearing in mind my questions last time, but also clearly the issues that arose last year from the quality assurance process that was in place.
Ms Blair?
Thank you very much for your question, Mr Johnson. I'm actually able to tell you that the information that you're looking at is actually where there's normal quality assurance taking place, normal external verification. So in other words, previously internally assessed coursework components offered by schools, which is coursework, for example, in the sciences, we don't normally, we're going to be putting in place different quality assurance arrangements this year in line with the fact that we're in a very unique situation. And as you've heard, we're working very closely with a range of partners. So it's local and national quality assurance, which is more supportive. Anyone selected for quality assurance will be provided with specific feedback designed to help support them make the right judgments, and they would be expected to share that within their centre and across their local networks. So it's a different approach that we'll be taking to quality assurance, but we would of course be very happy to provide you with more details on that.
Can I just briefly ask when that will be documented and released?
Yes, it will be documented and released, and it will be imminently. We've got a communication being developed just now.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think that at that point we will conclude questions to the panel this morning. Can I thank Addis, Education Scotland and the SQA for their attendance at the committee today, and also as this is likely to be the last time in this session of the Parliament, to thank you all for your engagement with the committee over session 5 of the Parliament. Next week we will be hearing from the Commissioner for Children and Young People in Scotland as previously agreed, and I will now suspend for 10 minutes and reconvene at 12 o'clock in private for our final agenda items. Thank you very much to everyone for their attendance this morning.